If you're tired of race and gender infiltrating seemingly every issue in society today, then our guest today is going to be a breath of fresh air. Angel Eduardo is the Director of Messaging and Editorial at FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. FAIR says it stands against the trend of governments, colleges, business, and media requiring people to identify based on immutable characteristics like race, gender, or sexual orientation. The organization has incredible people on its advisory board. Psychologist Steven Pinker, Professor Glenn Lowry, journalist Megyn Kelly, and dozens more. Very, very impressive. Angel has written several articles on the culture war, and each time he's written, it's thoughtful, it's compassionate, it's principled. And you can get a sense for what kind of man he is by his slogan. His slogan on his website, it says, "Be kind, we're all first drafts." I really liked that when I first read it. Outside of his writing, Angel's a musician, photographer, designer. I say he's the international man of mystery. He seems to disagree and thinks he's not. But regardless, I'm delighted to welcome him to the show today. Welcome, Angel.
Oh, thank you very much, Arjun. It's great to be here.
Excellent. All right. Well, Dan and I have a slew of questions for you, not least because truly it does feel like race and gender are in everything. But before we get to the heavy stuff, the first thing I found of yours was this short video that you have pinned up to your Twitter profile. And it says, "Why does Superman have to be white?" Mm-hmm. And it wasn't what I expected when I played it, but I really liked it. So tell us a little bit, why is Superman and this issue about skin color so important to you?
I'm curious actually what you thought you were going to get. I think it's called, the video's called, "Does Superman Have to Be White?" I think. That's
right. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. And I'm curious actually to hear what you thought.
Well, the title stuff, in part because I knew about you being at FAIR, so I had a sense what it would turn out. But the title, if you just heard it in abstract, does Superman have to be white? It almost sounded like it was going to turn out to be, well, we shouldn't have him as white and he should be a different color or he should appeal to different races or all this stuff. And that wasn't at all what the video was.
Yeah.
So I was pleasantly surprised, put it that way.
Yeah, well, I've been a Superman fan since I could remember being conscious. I was born in 1985. It was the perfect time for that, I suppose. There were plenty of cartoons and movies and things to watch. And I mean, just the red cape, like something about it was, I had me jumping from couch to couch and, with a towel around my neck. And then, I had some family friend, literally make me a cape and all kinds of stuff. Something just really resonated with me. And it never occurred to me that something about that resonance was connected to, these things, like this thing called race and this idea of skin color, right? I didn't see Superman as having a race. I didn't see him as anything except Superman. And, at some point later on, many years later, at some point, somebody broached this idea of, well, what if Superman were black, or what if Superman were whatever? And I found the idea ridiculous kind of on its face. I just kind of said, why would you even do that? Because as you said, I think the character has already appealed to many different people from many different cultures and backgrounds and skin colors and whatever. And I think that I'm not alone in having had the character resonate with me despite looking different. And so the idea of, now we're going to make him look like you, Angel, we're going to make Superman look just like you. The idea that that's going to do something is profoundly offensive to me as someone who already loves the character, who already has resonated with the character on a human level, on a level of ideal, on a level of, this is something that really matters and connects with me as a person, right? It's not about his race, right? And so the thing is that he was created the way he was created for whatever reason, and it just is what it is. And despite the fact that he doesn't look like me, despite the fact that he doesn't look like so many people in the world, right? Even quote unquote white people, right? He's a very particular look. It's not just like he looks like a white guy, right? Danny DeVito's a white guy. They do not look alike. So it the whole idea to me was just, I found it insulting to my intellect. I found it insulting to the relationship that I had with the character. And I think that anything that we do to try to change that, you have to ask yourself why. Why are you doing this? right? It's like, oh, let's make Superman black. Okay, why? Why are you doing it? If the idea is because then he will resonate more with people who look like me or people who look like you, Arjun, I think that's gross, because there's nothing about him right now that prevents me from resonating. And the idea that he can or should resonate more with someone like you or me because we've changed him to look more like you or me, I think is emphasizing the wrong things, because those characteristics don't matter. So it's really just the fact that there's no good reason to do it. And the other reason that people give is, well, it would be narratively interesting. You know, wouldn't it be cool? Like, what if we had, you know, an alien from another planet presents as a quote unquote black person, right? And has to navigate those social realities, right? That's very interesting. I agree. It would be undercut by shoehorning it into the Superman framework, right? It's better to create a new character that has those, you know, those characteristics so that you can explore those things with the total freedom that you deserve, right? Just taking Superman and making him black and thinking that you've done something, I think is lazy. It's uncreative, and we don't want that. Besides that, there are already characters that exist that will serve this exact purpose, right? There's a character called Icon, and it is literally that exact idea, right? It's an alien that landed on Earth and is sort of like a shape-shifting type situation, and basically changed himself to look like the first person that he encountered. And the first person that he happened to encounter was a slave. And so he decided to present as a, you know, black man in America, and that now we're off, right? But he has all the same, you know, very similar powers to Superman, and the dynamic is the same. Why not just take that character and run with it? You have all this freedom, right? So it just seems lazy to me on one hand, and essentializing on the other hand, and tokenistic, and just uncreative, and you know, lame, and just gross. So that's my spiel there. You can watch the video if you want more.
I think everybody listening should watch the video, and I would also like to thank
We'll put it in the section below, and we have the resources below. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no, and I'd also like to thank you for giving me the image of Danny DeVito as Superman. That's
and if that's too extreme for people, Nicolas Cage, also wrong.
Yeah,
and he literally was going to be Superman in the 90s. Like, it was, we were this close. Yeah, we were this close to getting Nicolas Cage as Superman in a film directed by Tim Burton.
Oh my
That
goodness.
almost happened. And I was just as upset about that, because he's wrong. He doesn't look the part. And there's a documentary about it you can watch. It's called The Death of Superman Lives.
There's some alternate universe where that happened and everything went wrong. I want to build on what Arjun said as well, because, you know, one of the phrases that's said a lot, which I believe is representation matters.
Yeah.
So how do you do representation right?
You definitely do not do it by focusing on these superficial characteristics, right? There was a Twitter thing going around, and it was basically like people sharing photos or GIFs, and the message that came along with it was like, when was the first time that you saw yourself represented in media? And so, you know, a girl with red hair would post Curly Sue or something from that movie. I posted a GIF of Christopher Reeve as Superman, right? I was 3 years old. I saw that guy, and I was like, I want to be that. That's me. I feel a connection here, a fundamental connection here. And I invited people to answer the question in a less superficial way. And then we started to get really interesting responses, right? We would have anime characters. We would have people who are completely different ages and body types and heights and, you know, all different things. But they were focused on, no, I resonated with this person's story. I resonated with who this person was. This person to me was just like me. If we had met, we would be best friends, because we have so much in common in those fundamental ways. That is how you do representation right. And the thing is, yes, representation matters, but we have to be very careful not to be superficial and tokenistic about it. The thing that I brought up was, let's say there's a new Netflix series and it stars a, first generation Dominican American musician who lives in New York City. Am I represented now? what if this person is like a total asshole? And like, what if this person likes all different music than I do? What if this person has a totally different family dynamic? What if this person, you know, has totally different preferences and everything, right? What if everything about them was different except these characteristics that you're deciding are the most important? Am I represented? Do I have to see myself in this person? What if I see myself more in the supporting character who's from a completely different part of the world and has a totally different background? You know, like, it doesn't make any sense. You know, so depending on how you think about the question, when is the first time you saw yourself represented in media? The answer would have to be never. And it will never happen unless I am literally on a TV show. Because the only way I will be represented is if I do something. That's the one end of it. And the other end of it is with any human being that I resonate with. Literally anyone that I have a connection to, any movie that I watch that makes me cry, any song that I hear where I feel for what the person is singing about, any book or poem that I read where I connect with the words and the message and the idea. That's when I'm represented, because I'm a human being reading or, you know, watching or listening to something produced by a human being talking about being a human being. In my view, the problem that we have so often in our discourse and in our society is that we either don't zoom in close enough or we don't zoom out far enough. We're all kind of operating in this low resolution middle where everything is fuzzy and we do really ridiculous and gross things. So that's what I think about representation.
Man, I love that. That's so good. My family accuses me of being idealistic far too often. But listen to your answer. You sound way more idealistic than I do. Lord.
I am. I'm unapologetically idealistic.
Let's talk about that a little bit in the context of FAIR then. FAIR says, you know, it stands against this trend, like I said, governments, colleges, all these people identifying, requiring people to identify based on characteristics like race and gender. How successful have you been in advancing this mission against this trend? Like, what are the signs that this is working, or is this really a bunch of intellectuals saying this is the way the world should be? And then most of us are like, yeah, that's nice. Welcome to the real world. And we don't think that. Like, are we the minority here?
No, we're not. I mean, you're right that it is a bunch of intellectuals saying that, and that we do get the response of, yeah, that would be nice, but welcome to reality. And that's what I would call the kind of clash between idealism and cynicism. I would actually just note that in my view, people conflate idealism with naivete, and I do not think those things are the same. Idealism is a refusal to concede the present to the past and a refusal to concede the future to the present. That's what idealism is. It's ambition. It's knowing how you want the world to be and then moving in that direction and trying to get others to follow you. That's idealism. Naivete is thinking things are a certain way, but they're not, right? Naivete is thinking things can happen that cannot happen, but that's not the same. In terms of FAIR, I will say that, you know, yes, we're the foundation against intolerance and racism, but we don't focus so much on what we're against as much as we focus on what we're for, what we call our pro-human mission. Well, FAIR is a nonpartisan organization. It's dedicated to advancing civil rights and liberties for all Americans and all people, really, and promoting a common culture based on fairness, understanding, and humanity. That's what FAIR is. And being pro-human is at the center of that. What does it mean to be pro-human? It means advocating for one human race, individual civil rights and liberties, and a compassionate opposition to racism and intolerance that's rooted in our dignity and our common humanity. So that's what we're for. That's what we're proactively moving towards. So yes, we're against intolerance and racism. Of course we are. But this is what we're about. This is what we're trying to actually do.
But how do you know that you're actually achieving anything?
Great question. Here's exactly how I know. FAIR launched on March 4th, 2021. We are speaking on April 1st, 2022. As of April 1st, 2022, we have 115 chapters across North America and Canada. We have almost 40,000 members and more than 500 active volunteers. All these people are out there doing, thinking, working, connecting based on our founding principles, our shared values of fairness, understanding, and humanity, really going out there and doing it. So the discourse can say whatever it wants to say. Twitter can say whatever it wants to say about how naive we are and how little this is going to work. But stuff is already happening. We just recently launched Fair in the Arts, which is a whole other initiative to create a kind of that same common culture of fairness, understanding, and humanity, but specifically geared towards the arts, to create a community of artists who share these principles and want to go out there and produce beautiful work that reflects our common humanity. We have diversity training programs. We have Fair Story, which is like an educational curriculum that we're developing so that we have what we call a pro-human approach to teaching about history, which includes all the ugliness, but also all the light and all the beauty and all the potential that America has. A K through 12 curriculum, high school ethnic studies course, a learning strategy, professional development for teachers. We're working on all of these things. And also, Fair Perspectives, the podcast that I co-host with Melissa Chen. We have what we call Fair Transparency, which is kind of like a glass door sort of thing where people can anonymously report issues that they're experiencing at their workplaces or their institutions. So tons of stuff. And it's only been a little over a year. That's how I know it's working. Something's going on. There's plenty happening. We've grown exponentially, and it shows no signs of stopping.
Yeah, can we dig into that a little more? Because I'm really curious about the training aspect, both the workplace training and also sort of how you teach history. Because the one issue I see is that there are a group of people out there who think that America's racial past is in the past, it's over, and we just have to be good people and everything will be fine. And I know because I was one of them. One of my questions is, how do you balance it out so the people who aren't acknowledging of some of the racial inequities that exist in this country or don't give deference to that, how do you balance it out so those people aren't lulled into like this false sense that everything's fine?
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern, but it's not, I don't think it's a concern that is reasonable based on the way that, Fair Story and Fair in Education approaches these issues, because we're definitely not offering any kind of consolation to people that terrible things didn't happen or that terrible things aren't still happening. Our goal is to be as honest as we possibly can and, age appropriate, but as honest as we can about the reality of American history and the American present. So, nobody would walk away with the impression, oh yeah, everything's fine, racism is over. Those people who are complaining have nothing to complain about. That's not true. And we don't believe that. What we do believe is that there are more and less productive ways for us to engage with those realities, the reality of today and also the reality of our history. And our focus is trying to incorporate all of that, but also to be sure to show how much progress we've made, because we have. Even, Frederick Douglass in his 4th of July address that every year on 4th of July, people love to share and quote. They only seem to quote the negative stuff. They only seem to quote the parts where he's lambasting, rightly so, America for failing to live up to its stated ideals. But at the same time, he expresses both an admiration for those ideals and a hope for the future. He speaks very hopefully about, I know we can do this. If anyone had a right to be totally cynical and completely negative about the entire enterprise, it would be someone like Frederick Douglass, who was a former slave and who literally suffered the worst atrocities of, this country's hypocrisy. But even he could recognize the beauty of the ideals and the power of the ideals and the potential of them. Rather than merely being angry, he tempered his anger with a kind of a call to action to say, let's get this right. Let's do better. Let's become what we said we wanted to become together. Right. So I think our approach is very much like that.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, Angel, and actually it was your question, Dan, about representation.
Yep.
And you talked about, real representation, not just based on superficial characteristics. So let's tie that into current events. We are now seeing the Supreme Court nomination for Justice Ketanji Jackson. And it was very clear when President Biden was doing his nomination what he was looking for. He was explicit and said, I want a Black woman on the bench.
Right.
What's your take on this? Is that something that FAIR would have opposed? Would FAIR have said, no, that's not the way you should have done the nomination?
Well, we're politically nonpartisan, so I think FAIR would probably not make any kind of political statement in that way, but we do definitely on principle reject the idea of, you know, seeing people primarily as avatars of these immutable characteristics, or you know, these categorizations. Like race is not an immutable characteristic. It's a nonsense category that we've created. We see it, but it's not actually there. But yeah, we wouldn't want that, because that's, you know, that is a fundamental kind of erasure of this particular individual's uniqueness as a human being. Personally, I think it's theater, and I think it's unfortunate, because she seems just as smart and qualified as you would imagine. And, you know, of course she's gonna get confirmed. Like, the whole thing is kind of a circus. And I don't know how she personally feels about it. Maybe she's fine with it. I can tell you how I would feel about it, because I've felt this way before. I would feel all the hard work that I've done and all the effort that I've put into being as qualified as I am, however qualified that is, that it's been reduced, or that it's at least been put under this umbrella, and that there will always kind of be an asterisk next to my name. Now, the thing is, it's well-intentioned. I totally understand why it was done in the first place, right? Because we have a history and we have a reality that we have to grapple with. I just think that this is a kind of clunky way of trying to correct it, right? Because representation, again, what does it mean that she is what she is? What does that mean to anybody? Like, again, are you represented just because you share those specific characteristics about her? Does she represent you now? Does she represent you more than she represents me? You know, these questions are still open, and the arguments that are made kind of make a mockery of those questions, in my opinion.
That really resonates with me, because one of the things I was thinking as I was going through your work is, you know, having grown up in the 80s, and I grew up in a suburb in Boston. I don't know if you've been to Boston, Angel, but yeah, you're either Irish, Italian, or Greek, pretty much is the way it goes. So where I grew up, if you were non-Catholic, that was like diversity. If you had a Protestant in your class, it was like, whoa. Right. I mean, so I grew up in that environment. And I think for me growing up, what I realized is, you know, I was raised non-racist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when communities of color are portrayed in a certain way in the media, mm-hmm. and when you have, I think the Cosby Show was probably the only bright spot in media for somebody non-white during that period of time, it can't help but infect your perception. And I really dealt with that. And it took me a while to process the influence that it had on me, despite being raised non-racist. And it seems to me, though, the interesting thing I'm hearing in what you're saying, and I'll ask for your confirmation on this, it almost seems like the pendulum has swung the opposite direction. Yeah. And now, instead of creating Black characters who lack depth in a negative way, we're running the risk of creating Black characters who lack depth in a positive way. Am I understanding you correctly, or am I totally off base here?
I think that's definitely a risk, because we are prioritizing those characteristics over the humanity of the person, right? Now, it's not that you can't have a show that is, you know, social justice minded and have characters that you're purposefully framing a certain way so that they portray a certain thing that you want. You can totally do it and have it be a good show and have it be interesting. But I think it depends on not just your ability, but also your motivation, right? If all you're trying to do is, the Cosby Show is a great example, right? It's they just said, no, we're going to make a show. This guy's a doctor. They live in Philadelphia. He's got a family, and it's about them living their lives as a family, right? Yes, they're Black, and they're going to grapple with certain issues as a result of those things, but they're still full, complete characters with their own lives. And plenty of people watch the Cosby Show that don't look anything like them and don't share their, circumstances, right? Family Matters was another one. Like, there were definitely issues of race being discussed, but not every episode was about being Black. Not every episode was leaning into that all the time. It was very much a family show where you can connect no matter who you were, right? And Fresh Prince was also another one. they dealt with even more interesting dynamics, because they had episodes where, you know, Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv's friends from back in the day, from back in the civil rights marches and all that stuff, which Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv were part of, right? They chained themselves to the fences and they sat in and they did the marches and the protests. And then they still have some activist friends who would come on the show, you know, as visitors or whatever. And there would be some kind of tension, like, oh, you know, you sold out because you live in Bel Air. Now so there would be these weird kind of interactions that they would deal with on the show that were really interesting. And the dichotomy between someone like Will, who is more kind of stereotypically, you know, culturally Black, quote unquote, right? Like, you know, he's into that kind of music. He dresses a certain way. He speaks a certain way. He's the cool hip guy. And Carlton is the dorky, nerdy sweater vest khakis guy, right? And they would deal with episodes about, you know, Carlton being considered not Black enough or not Black at all, right? And what that means. So it's so much more interesting when you go in and actually dig into being human beings.
This really dovetails well into something you wrote for Newsweek that I read ahead of this, which is "Stop calling me white for having the wrong opinions." And it really helped me understand how you arrived to where you are. And could you, for the listener, could you talk a little bit about your childhood and kind of how that helped form your opinion?
Depending on where you want to start, you know, I was born in the city. I was born in New York City. For the first seven years or so of my life, I was primarily surrounded by people who spoke Spanish. You know, except in school, I would meet some kids from other places, but my environment in Washington Heights, the storefronts are in Spanish. We even have our own cabs. Like, yellow cabs don't exist there. It's black Lincolns with little Dominican flag decals. Very much that kind of little, you know, it's you know, the Dominican Republic 2.0, right? So I had that kind of environment where that's the way it is. And I would get a little bit of what you would call diversity at school, right? There would be kids from other places, but hugely Spanish speaking. And then I moved to a suburb in New Jersey. And suddenly, you know, the kid across the street from me, he's Indian. The kid next door is from El Salvador. There's a kid from the Philippines. And then my town was just like 60 to 70% Korean, right? So it's a huge kind of mixture of stuff. And for the most part, we didn't really pay attention to those things in that way, right? We just thought like, oh, cool. And you eat that kind of stuff. This is the language you speak at home. You know, these are the weird, interesting things about you based on your background. But we were all just kind of kids, and we were shitty to each other, but we weren't shitty to each other for that reason. We were shitty to each other for, you know, the other stupid kid reasons, like, oh, you don't have the cool shoes. You don't have the toy that everybody has, or the bike everybody has, stuff like that. You're not cool. Like, that was it. But as I got older and we got to that kind of middle school age where everyone's trying to create their identity and find themselves, that's when a little bit of that stuff started kicking in, where people started getting into cliques and things. And so, you know, I was just as insecure as any other kid, probably more. And I was super sensitive. And I tried my best to kind of like assimilate into the Spanish kids, right? Because I was like, well, that's my group, so let me go hang out with them. And, you know, I hope they think I'm cool. And then we can, you know, we have all these things in common. But it didn't work because I speak the way I'm speaking now. And I was listening to Queen and Led Zeppelin. And like, you know, this is like in 1997 when no one even knew who that was, let alone enjoyed it, right? People were listening to hip hop music and stuff like that. And it didn't connect with me at the time. I dressed differently. I acted differently. I found different things funny. So it just didn't work. So I couldn't connect in that way. And I was kind of forced into the wilderness and just figure myself out and just be myself. But one thing that happened often during that period was that I was called white for speaking this way. I was called white for being a voracious reader. I was called white for listening to Led Zeppelin and Queen instead of, you know, Puff Daddy and Busta Rhymes and whatever. And so that's where that kind of thing came from. And the article is more about in the present day, the way people weaponize that same sort of thing, that it is an accusation, right? It's like, oh, you're being white. That's a negative thing in the way that it's given to you, the way that it's spoken. It's an accusation. It's a kind of, you're a traitor to this group. And there's an in-group kind of gatekeeping that people do that I think is really disgusting. And so that's what that piece was about.
It's a very nice reflection back on your upbringing and what you had to go through. I bet a lot of people listening experienced periods where they felt like they were in the out group,
Yeah.
they didn't belong, or maybe ostracized for the stupidest of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes characteristics that they had no control over.
Right.
So that's really interesting. I think about Marcellus Wiley, the ESPN commentator. He's a former football player.
Yeah,
he's very outspoken about this, actually. And Marcellus is also one of the few public figures who are Black who sort of also rejects this, let's make everything about Black people being downtrodden, victimized. So some of what you were saying reminded me of that. But the bit I wanted to talk about was, we talk about all these inequities that have happened in the history of America. And Black people have definitely suffered for policies and legal stuff that's made it very hard for them to come up the economic and social ladder. And one of the most prominent ones is redlining, of course, which everyone knows about at this point.
Yeah.
So now imagine that you're trying to make policy and you see this group that has really been marginalized and hammered for decades. One policy prescription that is bandied about is reparations, saying we've got to make it up to these guys. They got shafted. They didn't get to build generational wealth like all these other groups did. No wonder they're way back there.
Right.
So we've got to do something to fix that. The principal idea is that colorblind policies are not good enough. You need color-specific policies because we need to right these wrongs from the past.
Right.
And something like reparations is one of those. What do you say to that?
I'm open to the idea of it, but I'm curious. I'm as curious as many people are about how one would execute such a thing effectively. I don't know. Possible that it can be done. But I'm not sure how. I can't see it, and I'm not an economist, and I'm not a policy person, so it doesn't matter if I can see it or not. But I'm open to hearing about the conversation. But I think the principles at play make sense, right? It's I use the analogy of a race all the time, and just saying, we live in this society where some people say, hey, look, the gun goes off, everybody starts running. If you make it to the finish line, you made it. And if you don't, well, tough, you weren't fast enough, work harder. In its context, seems fair and seems to make sense, but you have to take into account the fact that some people don't have legs, right? Some people don't have sneakers. Some people have never trained to run at all. Some people can barely walk, and some people are just kind of 50 feet behind on the finish at the starting line. So even if the gun goes off, and even if they have sneakers, and even if they train, and even if they run as fast as they can, they're still way behind, and it's not their fault. That's just where they ended up. So I think it makes perfect sense to want to correct those things, because in my view, people are born into certain circumstances, and they're born with certain talents and certain skills and into certain environments, and they don't get to choose any of those things. And society values different things differently. So someone who is a phenomenal athlete has a better chance of succeeding in that. Let's say they're, the most phenomenal football player that has ever lived. A lot of that is just kind of chance. It's just kind of the fact that they were born with certain talents and skills, and they were born predisposed to being like 6'6" or whatever, and 250 pounds and just super fast and nimble, right? They didn't pick that. You don't pick your traits from a buffet before you're born. But society really values football, right? So if you're amazing at football, someone's going to find you, and someone's going to put you in the NFL. It's more complicated than that, but I think you get what I mean. But then if you're, let's say, the most incredible painter on earth that has ever lived, right? We don't really value painting that much anymore, right? It's not the primary medium. It's not a super popular thing. It'll still, no matter what your talent, it'll still be super difficult for you to become successful at it, right? Just because of the way society is structured and what we value and how we value it and how that translates to making a living. So those things are just fundamentally unfair. How do we fix that? In my view, the way we fix those things is creating a baseline beneath which nobody should live because we refuse it on principle, right? We just say no one will live beneath this level of dignity because we're the richest nation in the world, and that's just unacceptable to us, morally unacceptable. So in my view, it's all about the floor, raising the floor. So to the reparations thing, I see it as an attempt to correct that thing of, certain people being 50 feet behind the starting line, right? That's a way of fixing that. Whether it will actually do that, I don't know. Whether it can, I don't know. But I understand the desire. I understand the want to do that. But I think that if you have certain, what you would call colorblind policies, like UBI, where everyone just gets it, right? That might be more effective, because you're correcting the same issue, but you're doing it in a more kind of systematic way that makes more sense. It doesn't have these weird kind of complications to it that something like reparations would have, where it's like, are you really an ancestor of a slave? Or are we just going to like go by melanin content? Like, you know, do immigrants count? Like, it becomes really, really complicated. I don't know the answers to those things.
I'm loving the way you put that. I've thought about this a lot, and in my mind, the role of government is to make sure no one is a victim of circumstance. And the debates we have are what qualifies as circumstance. So if you are descended from formerly enslaved people, is that a circumstance greater, or does that outweigh just being born into generations of abject poverty? But I think the interesting thing, and you brought up here, which is a problem we have in America, and I think part of the reason why race and identity so often come to the forefront, is we really lack a shared value system in this country. In a way, or what we have is very loose. And really in America, I think the value is kind of like, you do you. That's kind of literally the only thing we could all agree on. And so I guess I'm curious as to whether you think we're doing enough as a people to create a shared value system that creates a bar we set for what it means to live in dignity. And if not, where are the gaps?
I actually don't think that we don't have shared values. I think we do have shared values. We just don't realize that we do, because so much of our discourse is about either the narcissism of small difference, or it's about fomenting difference where there once wasn't any. I think we're kind of trapped in these narratives that not only can't we understand people who live in, you know, like I'm in New York, someone who lives in like Nebraska. Not only can we not understand each other, but we shouldn't understand each other. I think that's what's going on. But I think that part of my work, part of what I really care about and try to put out into the world is this idea that we actually share the vast majority of our fundamental values, because we're all human beings. We all, you know, at bottom, we want the same things. Those desires manifest themselves differently based on where you are, how you grew up, stuff like that. But if you boil them all the way down, it's the same thing. Everybody just wants what I call, you know, safety, security, satisfaction, and success. Those things are fundamental to humans because we're just wired a certain way, right? The same way we're wired to pull our hand away from a hot stove. There's a fundamental foundational programming. Like, what do we want? We definitely don't want starvation. We don't want needless pain. We don't want needless suffering. We want the people that we love and care about to be safe and happy. We want to be safe and happy. Those are all things that everybody wants, and everyone is trying to get them. If we just remind ourselves of that, it becomes easier to sit down with somebody who has completely diametrically opposed views to yours and go, well, let me try to find out how it is that they think the way they're approaching what they're doing is going to get them the things that we both want. Like, what's their map? Right? We know what the destination is. Everybody has that same destination, but they all have different routes on the map. So it's like, how do they plan that route, and what makes them think that that route is the best?
How do we make sure that this doesn't slip into the tyranny of the minority? The truth is, life is fundamentally unfair. And like you said, we're all born with different capabilities, different backgrounds, different families, different wealth, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And I get that we want to have a floor that no one should have to live below. I think it's a noble goal. Let's say, for example, again, tying it to a current event, you shouldn't have to feel like going to the bathroom in a public place is difficult or controversial.
Right.
You're born a certain way, you'd like to just go in peace.
Right.
Of course, you know all about gendered bathrooms and all these bills that are being passed in various states saying you have to go to the bathroom that you were gender you were born at, and so on and so forth. And then other states are saying, no, you can go anywhere. We want to make sure it's completely inclusive to you. Like, it feels very difficult to reconcile that with let's try to have a common dignity. Because if you try to appease this relatively minority population, something like 1% that is faced with this, you also potentially have a 99% that are like, I feel kind of weird now. Maybe you should, maybe you should, but some do. And then if you don't appease the 1%, they're like, what happened to common dignity? I thought we're all the same. We have a baseline. Now I can't even go to the bathroom without worrying about being assaulted. So what do we do here?
That's a super difficult question. I think, none of what I'm saying should give the impression that any of this is easy. It's just a principle that we should have and be working from in order to try our best, right? So to jump to another example, just because I heard it so well put recently, but just, abortion is one of those things. Like, I don't think there's actually ever going to be an answer of which side is correct, because both sides are correct about certain things and both sides are incorrect about other things. And it just becomes a matter of like that tension and finding the kind of in between of that tension. How do we figure this out? Right? It's just really hard. That's probably a more complicated one because you have so many more people on either side of it than, the trans thing, that whole situation, right? We are talking about what amounts to a very, 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 very small fraction of the total population. Doesn't mean they don't matter. It doesn't mean their concerns don't matter, but it's a similar situation when you zoom in and just go, all right, well, you have competing calls for dignity here. What do we do? I don't know, but we have to be able to talk to each other or else we'll never figure it out. If it can be figured out at all, we'll never figure it out if we can't talk to each other, if we can't sit down and try to understand, like, look, I understand why this is important to you. Do you understand why this is important to me? And I think all the legislation and all the political battling and all the bullshit is us avoiding the conversation. It's us trying to dominate the conversation and silence the other side, when what we should be doing is actually trying to understand and figure out the best way forward, because even if trans people are only 1% of the population, each and every one of them deserves all the compassion and dignity that anybody else does. And again, that what that means is we have to figure out how can we kind of give you as much of what you want as we can, while also not totally ignoring the concerns that brings up for someone else, and vice versa. It's like someone says, I want there to be women's spaces so that I feel safe. Okay, that, you have a right to that and you have a right to feel that way. That's not something that should be dismissed, right? But the other side says, I want to have the dignity of going into a restroom that is designated for the way that I feel I am. I don't want to be forced to go somewhere where I don't feel I belong just to make you comfortable. That's also true. And how do we do this? I mean, sometimes there's a simple solution of like have a third bathroom that is a kind of all gender bathroom. And, anybody who wants to go to the exclusive places can go. And then there's a third one. But logistically, you can't have every restaurant and every gym and every, office building have multiple bathrooms in this way, right? Structurally and practically, it's probably not feasible. But anyway, I'm pointing to all the complexity, right? Yeah. The complexity can't be addressed. The complexity can't even be brought to the table if we refuse to talk to each other. And I feel like the problem right now is that people are refusing to talk to each other out of a kind of sense of indignance towards the other side, even questioning the thing that they want, because everyone is thinking about their own dignity and their own comfort and the compassion that is owed to them. And they should, but it has to be reciprocal. The tide going in here means the tide goes out here. And the people on either shore, those things matter. So what are we going to do here? I don't know, but we have to talk about it.
By the way, I'll just throw in one piece because you brought up abortion. One of the simplest quotes that I heard, it's not that profound, but Jimmy Kimmel, the late night host, once was talking about it. He said, I don't hate pro-lifers. They legitimately think abortion is killing babies and is murder. And while I don't necessarily agree with them, I can understand why it's so close to their heart. Like, that's a big deal. Yeah. And so I don't hate them at all. Right. I just don't agree with them, but I don't hate them. And I thought that was really well said, especially for late night comedy.
I mean, you have to understand what people's founding assumptions are. If you believed that babies were being murdered, you would probably be just as fervently fighting against the thing.
Exactly.
Just you happen not to believe it. You have to think about that. And that's why it's so difficult, right? There are just foundational sort of things that I don't know if we're ever going to square them, because the lines are kind of arbitrary, right? So it's like some people draw the line at conception. Some people draw the line at 3 months. Some people draw the line at 6 months. Some people draw the line at birth. And you can kind of argue any one of those to varying degrees of certainty. So I don't know. It's hard.
I think part of what aggravates this is the fact that we have a system of elections in this country that is geared and designed to divide people into factions than to find consensus. Our current system rewards the person who wins one more vote than second place, not the person who wins the majority.
Yeah.
And so if I can just cobble together a faction of hardened partisans and not turn off enough people so that they vote for the other person, then that could secure me victory. And I think I think part of the problem is that it is too easy to weaponize race and sexual orientation and every other issue that we would lump under identity politics for political gain. And I think that's part of the reason why we're in this situation, and you have other multicultural democracies that aren't dealing with the same problem.
That's definitely an issue. I don't know if there's an easy solution again, but I like democracy for sure. It's better than the alternatives, right? Yeah. But yeah, you're right. And I mean, I don't know if we can even lay the blame necessarily on the political system itself, because I think it's a human thing, right? Othering is human. Creating an in-group and an out-group is totally human. It's been with us forever, since the beginning. This is just, a systematized manifestation of it, but we can counteract it, right? We have baser instincts that we have successfully sublimated and successfully overcome, right? No matter how hungry I am never tempted to steal a fruit from the fruit stand as I walk by, because I accept the greater good of our social norms. We can train ourselves to be better than what our nature intends, right? We could train ourselves to do things that nature, if it were some sentience, would never have imagined that we could do. We're doing it right now. I have faith that we can figure it out if we try. It is hard. I mean, we've all been angry, and we've all been in that place where our rage keeps us from thinking clearly, and we say crazy stuff and we do crazy stuff. And then later on, when we cool down, we're like, wow, I can't believe I did that. So we all know what it's like to get hijacked by ourselves, by our worst versions of ourselves. So this is just a kind of scaled out version of that happens often. And then it's kind of been systematized, but we can change that if we just try to be more mindful, I think.
One of the things that you and a lot of people at FAIR have been vocal about is cancel culture. And I'd like to spend a few minutes on this. The political left typically argues that cancel culture is sort of overblown. This is just the modern day equivalent of holding people accountable to the BS, the bigotry, the bullying that they got away with in the past. And we're just finally holding them accountable. That's it.
Yeah.
And this is just completely made up right-wing nonsense. And then the right, on the other hand, is like, this is shutting down free speech. Free speech is such an important part of this country. It is one of the most fundamental things that we all believe in. Now you can't say anything. You say the wrong thing, you're getting shut out. And if it's not a public lambasting on social media, well, it's happening a lot more privately off social media. People are losing jobs and losing tenure and losing all these kinds of things. And it's a real issue, but is not being acknowledged. What's your thoughts on this? Is it overblown? Is it real? Is there any way out of this if it's a real issue, etc.?
I don't use the term cancel culture because it's just pointless. Because it's at this point, it means whatever the person you're talking to thinks it means. And you have to basically spend a few minutes settling on a definition before you can have a conversation about it. So to me, that renders a term useless. And also, I think it's a kind of flippant thing. But it's funny that the way that you framed it as, the left saying this is overblown, it's not a big deal, it's not happening. And then the right is saying this is an assault on free speech. Because those roles flip depending on the topic, right? When it comes to quote unquote CRT, suddenly the alarm bells are ringing on the left and the free speech argument is happening on the left. And on the right, people are saying, oh, this is we're just holding you accountable for the terrible things you're trying to impart to our children. So everybody wants the cancel culture baton, Nobody likes getting hit with it. So that's kind of the issue. And, you know, there's some truth to the fact that people are being held accountable for the things that they say and the things that they do that are wrong. But it's also true that the Overton window has dramatically shifted to the point where the sorts of things that people want to hold you accountable for have become, you know, what any reasonable person would consider innocuous or not wrong at all, or just even perceived slights or perceived bigotry, perceived
Do you have an
racism.
example, Angel, just to make it more concrete?
I can imagine, you know, we were just having the conversation about the trans bathroom things, and literally just asking either question, just asking like, you know, how come I have to allow this particular person into my space, right? Like, women's spaces are for women. Why can't I have a right to that? Just asking that question is, for some people, grounds for disproportionate and vicious opprobrium, right? And possibly worse. Saying that there's a difference between trans women and women, that there are differences that matter, right? In some cases, they matter a lot. Saying that can get you in trouble depending on, you know, who you are and where you're at, right? If you're J.K. Rowling, you're generally okay. People hate the shit out of you, but you'll be fine because you're, you know, filthy rich. But other people, not so much. And vice versa, you know, like just saying like we want to try to teach our children about the reality of racism in this country and the history of racism in this country. And you have people who are generally on the right wing trying to stop that with, you know, legislation, but they do it in a super clunky way. And they do it in this way that, depending on the specific example, could be they're betraying their actual perspective on those issues, right? That is what, you know, not something I would agree with. There's definitely a prevalence of this sort of thing. And I know it because of the way that people behave about it, which is, I'll give you an example. I know somebody who very gleefully posted on social media about someone that she knew that she was working with, who she said had posted or said, you know, quote unquote racist shit, right? We didn't see what this stuff was, but basically they just said, you know, I this person has quoted racist shit. Let's see what their employer thinks about this. So I screen grabbed it and I sent it to their employer and see what they think about the racist shit that this person posted. And let's see if they want to work with somebody like this, right? That was basically what they wrote. And there's two things going on there, right? There's obviously the first example is the concrete kind of like, I'm trying to get you fired for something you said that I think is racist. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So I don't know because I didn't see what the actual content was. But the other thing is, this person gleefully posted about it on social media to report the fact that they've done this thing. And that to me indicates that there was someone to signal to, that there is something to contribute to. There's something that is going on that she feels this will get her the attention she wants, the praise that she expects, because there is a climate where this sort of thing is applauded. Both of those things are happening concretely, at the very least, in this person's world, at the very least. The thing is that the chilling effect is a separate thing as well. The chilling effect is kind of, you know, the perceived threat, the perceived risk. Maybe it's overblown, but it still has the effect of, I don't want to speak. I don't want to talk. I'm worried about this. And what if you're the one, right? Some people have said trans women are not women and they've gotten banned from social media. Other people have said that and nothing happened, right? But the thing about the chilling effect is, well, are you going to roll the dice about which one of those you're going to be? You know, what if you have a family? What if what if your job is like, you know, really important and you want to keep it? You know, what if you're concerned about all those things? You're going to be like, I'm not even going to wade into this, right? And maybe that's fine. Maybe it doesn't matter if you wade into that particular thing. But there's a kind of rolling blackout of this sort of stuff, to the point where the only people having the conversation are the people willing to bully one another. And I think that's bad, because obviously moderation goes out the window there. So again, you know, all these issues are super complicated, and they're complicated even more by our inability to talk about them. I don't know if that answers your question. But.
No, that's great. I think, boy, what a summation, right? At the end, the only people that are willing to talk about the contentious issues are the ones that are safe from a wealth and professional standpoint or something. But then they're usually the more extreme on these points, and they can just bash each other. And then the net effect is we all look at it and say, oh my God, the world is really divided, and we all are either on one side or the other. Meanwhile, there's folks like you that often just say it's complicated. I don't know. I can understand. I need to read. That's not a common, that line doesn't usually get a lot of retweets and likes.
No, I mean,
complex and hard are not selling points.
Yeah, it's hard to tweet that for sure.
Well, that was outstanding. I just have a pseudo frivolous question, but only because you said you grew up listening to Led Zeppelin, and so did I, and I was a ridiculous Zeppelin fan.
All right, there we go.
In later life, more Pink Floyd than Zeppelin, but still, top 3 Zeppelin songs for you.
Oh man! All right.
I know it's going way back, but still.
All right, let's take "Stairway to Heaven" out. Because that's the obvious, like, greatest song of all time thing, right? So let's take that out. Achilles' Last Stand,
nice,
is like huge. Kashmir is huge, and man, the Rain song probably.
Wow,
that's like one of the most beautiful songs that's ever been written. It's gorgeous. Like
nobody ever says the Rain song.
It's just beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful.
Very nice. Like most other kids, I think, who ever picked up a guitar and were listening to Zeppelin, you first try to play Zepp on the guitar and it's brutally hard. It's like the worst way to ever pick up an instrument is try to play Zeppelin. But I remember trying to play Over the Hills and Far Away. And
that's a tricky one.
Yeah. But when you finally get that opening riff, you feel like God. You play it all day, every day. You're just like, I am king of the world.
I play it all the time. It's so much fun. It's such a that's a tricky one actually to learn how to play. There's some easier kind of riffs that you can if you're starting out on guitar, you can do Whole Lotta Love, you can do Heartbreaker, and there are some riffs that you can do.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of those other ones are really tricky. Yeah, and Over the Hills and Far Away is definitely tricky. A lot of the acoustic stuff is actually much trickier.
I only had an acoustic, so I had to select from that group. But there was that, and then I think a little bit of Stairway, and then Black Dog also has a really cool riff.
Yeah, that's a trickier one.
Not that brutal. I felt like it was. I don't know a lot about music theory, so I don't want to sound stupid, but I think it was a pentatonic scale. I think it's like A.
Yeah, pretty much. Pentatonic. I don't know much either, but I know that. Yeah.
But it's so much fun to play. It's just amazing to play Zepp.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, they're the hammer of the gods, man. They're the best.
Thank you very much, Angel. This was really delightful, thought-provoking. Yeah. And I know when I go back and listen to it again, especially during the edits, more stuff will come out. You said a lot of really powerful and thoughtful things. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope everyone listening really got as much out of it as we did. And check out Angel, by the way. Follow him on Twitter. His handle is StrangelEdweird, which is cool.
It's supposed to be a play on my name, but
yeah, I liked it.
It's one character short. It's one character short. Couldn't fit it.
Most people who have Twitter have never really taken the time to tune an interesting feed. It takes way too damn long. But follow Angel, and your feed will already get a little bit better. I promise you that. And then check out Fair as well. They're doing some pretty cool stuff. So thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you very much.